Hey there, welcome to today's episode. Let me start by apologizing for my voice. It's very hoarse. I've had the flu again. I may cough throughout this. It's going to be an unedited session. I want to take a look at some of the new features that have been introduced in the public beta version of Live 12, which is 12.2.6b or something like that. If you're part of the public beta testing program, you'll be able to download it. You might have even had an email about it or something like that. If you want to sign up for that program, you need a proper copy of 12. You can head on over. You can sign up and you can test these pre-releases. So this is not an official release. It is a beta. It is buggy. I've tested it out already. And for me, I'm certainly finding a few bugs, but you can't be mad about that because that's exactly what this is for. However, it does introduce a whole ton of new features. And in this particular episode, I'm only interested in things that I care about, which is quite selfish, but some of the other things are beyond my pay grade. So the synths have been updated. There's a whole bunch of stuff. What we're looking at here is Expressive Chords, which is a Max for Live MIDI effect. It's been added to allow you to play chords more easily inside of Ableton. There's already a chord MIDI effect, but it was somewhat limited, and I think this is going to open things up a little bit, allows you to import your own MIDI chords and things, which I'll show you later on. But that's generally what I'm interested in. I'm also interested in the bounce to feature, so you can bounce to a new track now more easily. It's kind of replacing, I think, the freeze and flatten option, but it's going to come in particularly handy for me, and I'll tell you why that is in a second when we run through it. And we'll take a look at something like 16 pitches for the drum racks and stuff, because again, it's something that I'm going to use, and it came over from the Move, which was pretty cool. Let's get started and we'll dive in. So in order to load this up, and one thing I will say is I'll be bouncing back and forth between the two views. So if you're not particularly interested in what's happening with the push, we'll still take a look at it as the, inside of the DAW as well. I wanted to have the push out because when I'm using my push, I want this to feel like a standalone experience. I want to know, can I load up Expressive Chords directly from the device? Can I play with it here, tweak everything, and not have to use the mouse or be looking at the computer screen? So far, my tests seem to indicate that I can, and we'll take a look at that as we go through. But that's why I've got the push on screen. So we're going to begin by loading up a MIDI track. I've got a blank one here. I'm going to add a device to that. And I need to add an instrument because this Max for Live effect, this chord effect, is to control instruments. It doesn't have any sounds of its own. It's just something that's going to create chords that you can use to control other instruments. Bit of a weird sentence. Let's go here to yellow, where I've got all my contact instruments, or at least some of them. I'm going to use the Gentleman piano from Native Instruments because I figure if we're going to use chords, a piano is going to be a good way to demonstrate that. We'll load it up. And the first thing I'll say is that it's completely separate from the scale option. So if you've got a push 3 and you're used to using one of these, you've got your scale mode where you can set the key and the scale. This is separate to that, so the scale doesn't affect this. This is a separate MIDI thing for generating chords and scales. But if you change your scale inside of here, it doesn't affect this particular plugin. It's kind of its own thing. So we've loaded up the instrument. In order to control it, we need to add the Max for Live device. You can do this in multiple ways inside of Ableton. You can set up separate MIDI tracks if you like and send MIDI information from one to the other. So if you don't want everything on one track, I'm not sure why you would particularly want to do that, but you can if you want to. I'm doing it all inside of one track. So I'm now going to add the device, and we're going to go in here and go into MIDI effects or Max for Live. It's in both of those once it's installed. One thing I have to point out is that if you sign up for the public beta and you want to test this out, it doesn't come as part of the 12.2, whatever this latest public release is. You have to download it separately, and it wasn't so easy to find. I had to kind of rummage around inside that portal in order to find it. I can't show you it because it's a private thing that you have to sign into and everything else. But if you sign up for the testing program, just rummage around. At some point, you'll find it. You can download it and install it, and then it will show up here inside of MIDI effects or Max for Live. MIDI effects I'm going to use, and you can see it at the top, Expressive Chords. Before we load it up, there are a bunch of presets that they've given you to get started. Not too many. Starts here at Classic Pop and ends in 6 chords. The ones over on the left-hand side are custom ones that I've brought in to test what it's like to load in your own MIDI chords and, play around with those, which we'll talk more about later on. But you get a few. Hopefully by the time it really reaches a public release, we will see more of these because it's such a small thing that Ableton could just give you a ton of those to get you started. At the moment, there's a couple. Let's start with Neo Soul Major. This is what it looks like when it loads up inside of the push device. And what we'll do, we'll just quickly bounce back and forth between live so you can see the sort of comparison. But on the push device, basically everything that is lit up in white is a chord. If there's no chord set here on any of these pads, it will be dimly lit. So it only lights up when there's a chord available. And then these blue pads at the top control the articulations that you've got here. So we'll cover that in a second, actually. We'll come back to that. Let's quickly just jump over to live so that you can take a look at it here. Let me just move my contact player out of the way. You guys won't be able to see that. But down at the bottom, I'm just going to press this little blue arrow. I'm just going to move my mouse around so hopefully you can see it. Let's open this up. This gives you a few more parameters that you can mess around with. You've got your modulation screen where you can play with stuff in here. And then you've got an articulation editor that will be obviously something else you can tweak. Now, I'm not even pretending that I know what all of this stuff does. I just want to show you, to the best of my knowledge, what I understand about this so far. Hopefully, I'm going to learn more about it as we go through. But for those of you that are more savvy, I just want you to be able to see kind of behind the hood. You'll know what you can and can't play with. When we're looking at the sort of left-hand side, as I circle this here, it's just mimicking the pad layout on the push. So as I press this, you will see the square changes, the pad changes, and it will tell you when there's a chord there, so G minor. You can see the name of the chord, which is quite handy. I'll talk more about that as well a little bit later on. But when you press this other little icon at the top here, it gives you the sort of keys mode, which is kind of cool if you want to start learning what chords are and the sort of layout, the finger layout. You'll be able to see that for the different chords. So I think that's pretty cool. We'll move now back over to the push for a second. Just bear in mind that all of the parameters here are the same things we're seeing on the push. Back over into the push view then. So we've got this laid out. We can click on Neo Sol Main or Neo Sol Major because that's what we've loaded up. So you can see the other pages on the push device. So you've got main and then you've got the modulation page, just like you're seeing when you're looking at it inside of the DAW. We'll come back to that. Let's start with some of the basics. You've got transpose at the beginning, so it's pretty obvious. Transpose up and down. We've got tilt. Now, I don't know if tilt is a musician's term, something that you'll be familiar with. To me, I don't understand what that is. I can kind of hear what it's doing, but if it's an official music term, I don't play the piano or anything. Let's just listen. So you can hear it's kind of picking up some of the higher keys as you turn it to the right, and then as we're moving down, it's picking up some of the lower keys. That's all I can hear with my ear. If there's some kind of official term for that or what it's doing, you guys can let me know in the comments. But that's what it does with the tilt button. We've then got our inversion. Makes sense? Strumming is pretty cool because, as it suggests, it adds like a little bit of a strum. Now, it's a percentage thing, so let's just dial it in with a percentage so you can see what it sounds like. So you can hear it start to kick in. It's like a little twiddly, noodly thing that you can put in to give it some like human feel. And you can see as we increase the percentage, it gets slower. Now, I'm not sure yet because I haven't tested that to see whether that is somehow linked to tempo. So if you're recording that as a piece of MIDI information, is it linked? And again, if you've tested it out, let me know in the comments. But I really like that. Sounds great with a piano. It's probably going to sound great with like a guitar plugin or something. Then you've got your articulation. So let's talk a little bit about that because that is controlled here. So you can change the parameters with the encoders, but you can actually change it here, I guess, so that you can do it while you're playing in real time. And you'll notice on the top row, gives me 1 through, this is the articulations changing, all the way to 8. With reverse articulation is turned off. If you move down to the pads underneath, you'll notice it turns reverse articulation on, and then you get 1 through to 8. So you can mess around with that in real time. So I look at these as like control functions as you're playing the chords. Get the idea. Now, variation, I've got no idea what variation is doing in terms of what it is varying. We're going to test that in real time. Didn't try that this morning, but we can test it here. Okay, so to my ear, it sounds like it's varying the strum effect, which is kind of cool. So it's going to, again, just add more life and creativity into whatever you record. Seems pretty straightforward. The next page is into modulation, and this is where you're going to lose me, I'm afraid. I understand modulation destination. So with your mod wheel, what do you want to send over to the mod wheel or the mod slider here? We can send the tilt, the inversion, the strumming, or the articulation. I get that. But then we've got other percentages and things going through on these parameters. As of yet, I'm not 100% sure exactly what that does. We could spend some time here tweaking it and doing it in real time, but I'd rather just come back to that when I've got better information for you guys. If you're smarter than me, you've probably worked it out already. I just want you to be aware of what's available to you. So whether you want to do it here on the push device, or you want to move over back to live and you want to play around with those parameters here because you don't own a push, you can do all of that either from the DAW or from the push, and you can load it all up. I haven't had to use the mouse. I think it's pretty cool. I really like the idea of being able to use all of these chords because I'm not a musician. I don't have that skill. It's going to help me out, especially when I want to make things like fake samples. And that's another thing we're going to talk about very quickly. I can demonstrate bounce in place directly from the push device while we're here. Let's just go back over to the push view for a second. Let's record something because I want you to see what happens when we record as well. So I'll put my metronome on for a second. Don't know what the BPM is, but we'll record just a couple of chords to any tempo. It doesn't really matter. Hit record. And we could use that as a loop. If I move over here, we can see we've got our MIDI clip with the MIDI information. So we could crop that down to a 2-bar loop. Now, I'm not 100% sure there. Was that changing the variation as it comes around? Because that's kind of cool. If it just keeps varying it every time it plays around, it's going to make 2 bars a little bit more interesting because you're going to get variation in that kind of strumming effect as it comes around. But the other thing I want to talk about here is that we can do bounce in place now, and we can do it from the device. The cool thing about this is that it will bounce with an effect in place. Now, it doesn't bounce from the master chain. It's not like resampling. I did have a look at that earlier on, but it will bounce from here. So on this particular MIDI track where we've got our gentleman, if I just make sure the gentleman's selected, I'm going to just click on this here, add a device, and we'll add an effect of some sort. I'm going to add an RC20 just to give it like a vinyl feel. You can hear that, hopefully. We'll crank up the wobbliness just so that you've got an idea what it's doing. There you go, it's adding that vinyl feeling. So for somebody like me who likes to make fake samples, having access to chords and being able to add effects is really good. But if I just want to make that into a sample very quickly so that I can chop the thing up, we can actually do it right here on the device. Now, earlier when I tested this out, there is a little bit of a bug. That's because we need to access the MIDI clip in order to bounce it down. If I move over here where you access those clips, you'll notice it kind of keeps these lights on. And the only way I've found to access it is to randomly press one of these other pads, and all of a sudden I can see the MIDI clips. Now, I think that's a bug because I think it should just jump over and show me the clips like it normally does inside of the Ableton, workflow. So we can see it here now. I do Shift, press this MIDI clip, and aside from renaming or changing the color, I can bounce that to a new track. It calls it the same thing as whatever the MIDI track was called, so it looks like a duplicate, but this one is an audio track. And you can see we've just created a sample with that effect baked in. I could now just convert that to a simpler and start slicing the thing up and have a lot of fun with it. Just wanted to show you that. Obviously, there are multiple uses for bounce in place. I know it's always been a bit of a problem for some people with the kind of freeze and flatten method that Ableton use, but bounce in place is now here, certainly in this public beta, and of course it will be when it's an official release. So yeah, really, really cool. The next thing, of course, let's just jump back to our other view, and we'll move over here back to the MIDI is what I'm looking for, because I want to talk about importing your own MIDI chords into this thing. Now for this, it's not really going to be possible, I don't think, from the push device. I think this is more of a DAW thing. So we're going to move over and take a look at the DAW. Back over here, we can see obviously Ableton. Hopefully it's going to be big enough for you guys to see. I just need to move my RC20 out of the way. Now, when you want to import your own MIDI clip, you could do that in multiple different ways. And one of the creative uses that has kind of just occurred to me that I think I might use it for is because inside of Ableton, if you bring in an audio file, could be a piece from your favorite song or something, it does have the ability that you can right click on that audio file and convert it to MIDI information. It will pull out like melodies and things. It will try and find chords, stuff like that. It's not always perfect. But if you had something that was like an old piece of piano, like very simple, something you found on a record, a good sample, I could then convert that, because it would convert pretty well, I think, in terms of the chords, over to a new set of MIDI chords. And then I could bring them in, and then I could load them up, because when you bring in your own MIDI chords, you can save those as presets to pull up whenever you like. I've done that already, just with a couple of basic scales so that I could test it out. So I think that's really cool. In order to do that, we're not going to do that as a demonstration. I just wanted to give you one creative use. We're just going to bring in some basic MIDI chords. Now, just like everybody else, you know the typical MIDI chord packs that were advertised on YouTube. I've got a bunch of those here in my MIDI chord files. So you'll be familiar with some of these. I'm sure some of you have bought the same ones. They were advertised forever on YouTube. In order to get them to work, we have to load them to the MIDI track where the instrument is, certainly where the Max for Live device is. So I'm going to double click on the gentleman at the top so we can see the Max for Live device again. And there is an import button at the bottom of the screen. Now, if you just click import, it's not going to do anything. You have to select the MIDI clip first. I'm going to delete the MIDI clip that we had here. I'm just going to get rid of it. And we're just going to drag something in. I'm going to drag in a single chord here. I'm going to go with this one, which is a D minor. What are we talking about? E minor here. This is part of the D major scale, sorry. So we've got E minor. If I highlight that, hopefully you can see what I'm doing on the screen. I've highlighted it as a MIDI clip. I press import. Just watch what happens. I'll move back over to the pad view and we'll just click import. All of those pads in the bottom left-hand corner have gone grey because there's now no information there. If we move back over to the push view, you will see everything is kind of grayed out. We need to be over in this pad view. But the one chord that we've loaded up is now loaded over here. It's the same that you see when you're inside of the DAW. It's just this one chord is in the bottom corner. If I press it, it tells me that it's an E minor, which is pretty cool. What I am going to do quickly is just turn off the effect for the gentleman. We don't want that RC20 getting in the way for now. Let's just take that off. We've got a nice standard E minor chord. The one thing that you can't do so far is, let's say you wanted to put a bunch of these together for yourself. I can't just grab multiple of those. So if I added another clip, what have we got here? We've got an A major. Let's say I drag that A major chord in underneath on this one. Let's say I wanted to add that to the pads, to this, little layout. If I click import while that one's selected, it overwrites what's going on. In fact, it's not doing anything because I haven't selected it. Let's do that again. What's up with you? There's another bug. Maybe it's had a bug. Or, no, sorry. It's just me not pressing the key. Thought it was a bug. But you'll notice it doesn't overwrite. It overwrites. It doesn't add it to the collection. I'd love to see that, where you could just pick individual chords and just keep adding to the pads. If you know how to do that, if you've discovered a way, I can't seem to find any way to do it. But if you know, let me know in the comments. That was one thing I'd love, because then you can just pick chords from whatever chord packs that you're looking at, put them all together in whatever order that you like, and just populate your, your little MIDI chord, whatever you want to call this plugin. You can do it if you've got a chord file that has lots of chords in it. So let's take a look at that. So this one at the top here is all triads for the D major scale. I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to press import, and just watch what happens in the bottom left-hand corner. It's brought all of those in. And just for the push users, just so that you can see that, so we've got them all there. That's okay, but I'd still like the ability to kind of just cherry pick through rather than having to have them all in the one sort of MIDI chord file. Maybe we'll see that as an update later on, but at the moment, that's kind of how it works. If you try and bring in individual files, you're just going to overwrite what was already there, or you can bring in a MIDI clip with a bunch of different chords and you can bring those in as a group. As I said, if I'm missing a trick there, let me know in the comments. But that's basically it in terms of the, expressive MIDI Max for Live effect. I think it's pretty cool. It's going to help me out a lot. It's going to be great for making fake samples, especially with this new bounce in place feature. And as you've seen, other than using the mouse to switch views between the DAW and the push device, I can do all of this directly from my push. The last thing I want to show you is just with the 16 pitches mode. I thought it's pretty cool that they've brought something over from the Move. So we're going to take a quick look at that. Let's add a new track, but we need to be inside of the push. So let's just move back over to our push view. I'm going to add a new track in. We'll add a MIDI track, and we'll do a default track, to which we'll add a device. And I'm now going to add in a drum rack of some sort. Can be any drum rack. I'm just going to use one of these basic ones that comes with Ableton. So you can see I've loaded up a drum rack. And what they've added, which came over from the Move, as you probably already guessed, is 16 pitches. So I press this button to change the layout. We've got our 16 velocities, any pad that you select on the left-hand side. You can play with the velocity, but you can also press it again, and you now get 16 pitches, which is really cool because on the Move, I did own a Move. It was a great little device. I really enjoyed this. So with whatever selected, you can play around. Now, this is great because it does work with the scale feature. So if you turn your scale on and you have it in key, it will be correct when you're playing over here. And you can also play with the octaves as well. So we can move up. Just going to add some nice creative potential. Playing around with drum loops or something, and you want to add little ghost hits in or whatever it is and have them at different pitches, you could do that. Obviously, you could load in like a C note, an instrument sample, and then play it like an instrument. It doesn't really have polyphony. It's not something where the samples kind of overlap. At least I've not found a way to do that so far. But it is here. Now, one other thing, just while we're here, there is a way to do this as well when you have a simpler. So if we load up another device, let's add a MIDI track and add another device. We'll go to default. Add in a device. I'll go into my collections because I know there's simpler in here somewhere. Let's load up a simpler. And what I want to do is use the hotspot button to load a sample into that simpler. So we'll move over here, find, what am I looking for? Wave files. Just move up a touch. And then what am I looking for? Let's go for a sample of some kind. We'll go into sample packs and let's pick, I don't know, anything from jazz style will do. Let's go into compositions. I'm just going to load this first one up. So we've loaded a sample into our simpler. We can see that if we move over here. Now, when you're in classic mode, obviously it plays like chromatically, so you've got some creative potential there. But if we slice it up, put it into a slice mode, put accent on for a second, fix velocity, we've got all of these sample chops that we can mess around with. If I change the layout here, I can actually access the same thing. So we've got 16 velocities. But if we press it again, we also get 16 pitches. Pretty cool. However, not sure if this is a bug or it's just not been implemented yet. You can't change the octaves. So when we did that inside of a drum rack, we could move up and down the octaves. And you'll notice, let's say it's, what piece do we want? Got this little piece here. It starts really low down in terms of the octaves. So what I want to do is press the octave button and move up, but you'll notice it's changing the pads and it doesn't change what's happening here. It's still low, even if I come up further. I've got a feeling maybe that's a bug, something that needs to be ironed out so that it acts more like the drum racks, or at least I'm hoping it would be, because that's not particularly useful for a sample like that. We've got this nice little horn sample that we've taken out of something. But when it's all super, super low down and I can't change that, don't really see much potential there. Hopefully we'll see that as an update and a fix at some point. I just wanted to point it out because I was experimenting with it earlier. And yeah, that's kind of what I came up with. Anyway, I'm going to sign off on this video here. It's probably been long enough. Apologies again if my voice is a little bit rough. The scatty kind of nature of this, because it was just an impromptu video, but I do think there is some gold here for Ableton users. I think when we get an official release and everything's kind of stable, maybe they will fix this 16 pitches for something like sample chops. It's going to be really exciting. And again, if I've missed the trick here with the 16 pitches, let me know in the comments, but I couldn't find any way of changing and moving up and down the octaves in this particular mode. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you're excited, if you're meh, who knows? See you guys in the next episode. Take care.